With MatPat's recent retirement, it got me thinking of a theory he never solved.
Anyway, just wanted to call that out because I don't have a solid answer for it, and I'd love to see your comments down below.
Now, for any Game Theorist fans, you would know that he's obviously referring to Sister location and where it's placed in the timeline, because it seems to be all over the place, and he couldn't solve this himself, and that's where I come in, because I'm gonna solve it, and you're not gonna want to miss a single bit of this video.
Daddy, you let the other children go see her. Why won't you let me go?
Now, this has been a huge debate in the fandom for some time, with many people believing it was before FNAF 1, and other people thinking it's after FNAF 1. So which one is it? Now, we have strong evidence to suggest that Mike was in the FNAF 1 location and the FNAF 2 location, and one of the main reasons for him getting fired at these locations is because of his odor, his smell, because as we know, he was decomposing after the events of Sister location, basically a walking corpse. This has led many people to believe that Sister location's placement in the timeline is before FNAF 1 in 1993. However, this can also be disproved because we have the Molten MCI, and obviously Circus Baby's placement in the timeline itself, which leads us into more and more problems. So where actually does it fit in the timeline? I don't know, Freddy, do you know?
Gregory!
Do you know, Rox? Who knows? Now, all the information is there for us to find. It's like a giant puzzle, and we just have to move around all the information to fit it in all the right places, and we'll get one complete timeline. Now, before we even get started, I know a lot of people are going to say there's no way that Sister location can be before the original Five Nights at Freddy's location because we have the Molten MCI. Now, I haven't forgot about Mike. We'll come back to him later. Now, the Molten MCI basically means that the souls of the children in the original FNAF location are inside Molten Freddy at the end of FNAF 6. And how this happens, you ask? Well, basically in the Follow Me minigame, William Afton dismantles all the animatronics and uses their parts in the Sister location bunker, creating the Funtime animatronics.
I know exactly where you are!
Obviously then them Funtime animatronics get lured to the FNAF 6 location, and they all burn in the fire, and they meld into one Molten Freddy. Now, the evidence for this comes from the FNAF 6 pizzeria, where you have Candy Cadet telling his stories of 5 things melded into one, and you also have evidence from the FNAF gameplay encyclopedia. And we also have further evidence from the Ultimate Guide, where it says William Afton melded the 4 kids together in the closet and gave an idea, and a keyword there, idea, of how Molten Freddy came to be. Now, with that information, you clearly think that Sister location was set after the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 in 1993, right? Makes sense? Well, that isn't entirely the case. First off, the Ultimate Guide, which we were referencing earlier, sure, it says that William Afton took the parts and made the fun times with them, but it also said that Mike was fired in FNAF 1 and in FNAF 2 because of odor, clearly put in Sister location before the events of FNAF 1. And remember what I said earlier to give an idea of how the fun times came to be? Well, that's it, an idea. It doesn't say this is how it came to be, just says idea, leaving it loosely open. But despite all this, you could say that Henry Emily's speech at the end of FNAF 6 does indicate that William took the remnant and created Molten Freddy with it.
He set some kind of trap. I don't know what it was, but he led them there again. He overpowered them again, and he robbed them of the only thing that they had again. I don't know how those tiny breaths of life came to inhabit those machines.
But that doesn't seem to be the case, and listening back to Henry's speech is extremely vague and could literally be referring to the 1987 MCI. Nothing to do with the fun times or him creating Molten Freddy. Plus, Candy Cadet's story is also super vague, doesn't refer to William or even him creating the fun times or Molten Freddy. In fact, it was about a woman using 5 keys to save 1 kid, an old man adopting 5 kids and then them being killed by a burglar, and another kid trying to save a bunch of kittens being eaten by a snake. None of that to me screams William Afton creating the fun times in Sister location and then going on to create Molten Freddy. Just doesn't make sense. All this evidence tells me is that the fun times already had souls, remnant, or agony built into them, and not the MCI souls. And if you use the game's evidence, the MCI souls actually stay firmly attached to the OG animatronics. And we can see evidence of this pretty much everywhere in the game, because we know FNAF's free good ending requires the souls of the original animatronics to be present in being able to free them in the Happiest Day minigame. Now, if they were in the Fun Times Sister location bunker, they wouldn't be present at the FNAF 3 location. Just doesn't make sense. And not only that, the bad ending in FNAF 3 literally showed the original animatronics heads all lit up, indicating that the souls are still present inside of these. But the biggest one for me is when we see the spirits chase William Afton into the Spring Bonnie costume. And as we know, obviously William Afton gets spring locked, but the fact that the kids' souls are present in this location again shows they're not in Sister Location's Funtime bunker or in the Fun Times. They're physically there. And this tells me that Molten MCI cannot come into play pre-FNAF 3. Now we do know that Molten Freddy does happen, but that doesn't impact where Sister location fits into the timeline. So then what really does? Because there are some really interesting factors which we haven't even talked about yet. Now, MatPat himself even admitted that he really struggled and couldn't place a timeline on the Sister location's creation. Lucky for us, we have key evidence which can help us do so and solve this theory after MatPat's retirement. Such as obviously in Night 1 in the Sister location, you have Hand Unit actually say this.
Due to the massive success and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
This basically means that Sister location was built after the closure of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And this gives us 3 possible points in the timeline where this could have happened. Obviously, post 1985's closure, 1987 in FNAF 2, and 1993 in FNAF 1. This means that Sister location's creation would fall under one of these 3 dates. And how do I know that? Well, in Pizzeria Simulator, the fun times are already present. So it has to fall under these 3 dates. Now, we know that William had created the fun times to basically go out, capture kids, bring them back, so then he could study the effects of Remnant. Now, what this means in a nutshell is that he would have had to have known about Remnant haunting objects or animatronics for him to even have this idea, meaning it would have to be after the events of 1985. So it couldn't be pre-1985. A victim would have had to have been claimed. Now, all this starts to make sense and the pieces of the puzzle start to come together, because obviously he killed Charlotte Emily. He's seen potentially that the puppet had obviously become possessed because before it didn't have streaks of tears on his face. Charlotte Emily possesses the puppet and now has tears. He starts to notice these things and that spurs him to make Sister location so he can capture the kids, study the Remnant, and ultimately use that for his own game, whether that's Eternal Life or something else entirely. So that helps us establish that it cannot be pre-1985. Now, something else which is extremely interesting in FNAF Delivery Service is a bunch of cut facts. And one of these facts actually says that one of the robots William Afton first created featured latching mechanisms, exactly like Circus Babies. And that basically tells me that if he created one of his first robots, and that's Circus Baby, it'd have to be pretty early on in the timeline. Now, another interesting fact is he has to get the board of directors to sign off on these designs.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
And that tells us a few things. 1, he's still part of Fazbear Entertainment, and 2, the board of directors, having signing these animatronics off, probably didn't know about any mass murders in the history of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Now, as I said earlier, William Afton would have to be a member of Fazbear Entertainment doing Sister Location's creation, because he was creating characters which were licensed by Fazbear Entertainment. You know, Freddy, Bonbon, Foxy, and these were sent out to people for birthday parties. Now, obviously, if he wasn't a member of Fazbear Entertainment, he wouldn't have the license to use these characters. And we also know that in FNAF 2, he was no longer part of Fazbear Entertainment because he was sneaking into the locations.
Especially concerning any previous employees.
He was no longer allowed in there, and that's where he was committing his murders. And the fact that he's using robots, the Funtime animatronics, to do so tells me it's earlier on in the timeline, because he's got a perfect alibi in the robots. Why would he want to go out and kill all these victims and take their bodies if he's got the animatronics to do it for him? Because later on, he resorts to killing the kids himself inside the Spring Bonnie costume. That's telling me that comes after the robots were scrapped. He had no other choice but to go out and do it himself, telling me it was pre-1987 and after the events of 1985. We're narrowing it down now between them 2 dates, between 1985 and 1987. There's also further evidence to back this up, because in Sister Location we actually see a spring lock suit which was being used. Now, we know these were discontinued as of 1987, so again, that's further evidence to imply Sister Location was created pre-1987. But there is a problem with this, and you might be thinking, well, in the bite of 1983, Mike is still a child himself. Well, he's implied to be a teenager, and that is in 1983. And if Sister Location opens pre-1987, Mike is an adult at this stage. That would only give us a few years minimum for Mike to turn 18, 19, and him going into Sister Location. But it does add up. If Mike is a teenager in 83, let's say he's 15, we add 3 years onto that, that's 1986, could easily be 18 by the time he goes into Sister Location. And further to this, there is no way William Afton will be able to create these fun times after he's spring locked. And we know know that literally happens in 1993. The same week, believe it or not, Mike actually turns up on location. His father's already in the safe room. If you want to know all about that, I highly suggest checking out my timeline video because it goes into huge depth on how that is even possible. Not to mention there are several books, games, and now a movie which all have overlapping elements and stories. Now with all the puzzle pieces in place and everything now laid out in front of us, we can easily say where Sister Location's placement is in the timeline. Well, it's fairly straightforward in my eyes. It has to be when Mike was an adult, so that's ruling pre-1983 out. Has to be when William Afton was a member of Fazbear Entertainment. It's simple fact. And we even know Mike was said in the game to be fired due to odor. But you could say, well, hang on, why would they hire a walking corpse? That doesn't make sense in itself. Surely the odor was from the animatronics because we know they were smelly. Sure, you could say that, but there isn't as much evidence as what we've just discussed backing up when Sister Location takes place. And all that says to me between 1985 and 1987. But I would love to hear your thoughts on where you would place Sister Location in the timeline. Please let me know in the comments below because I'll be reading every single comment. And I'd like to say, MatPat, I solved your Sister Location problem. We've done it. I'm Twisted Animatronic and I'll catch you superstars later. Bye bye.